Jasma, and today I'm going to bring you some wholesome seasonal content. So not only will I be showing you my foolproof sugar cookie recipe that has never failed me, but I'm also going to give you a very interesting way of decorating these cookies using food coloring and kind of a watercolor technique. This is very different from the traditional way of just only using royal icing, but I think that this is a lot simpler in a sense that you don't have to prepare and let it dry out as much as you do for a traditional one, but there's also less sugar involved, which is something that I always try to do. This is very sophisticated looking, and I think that it's super customizable, so you can basically paint on whatever you want onto these cookies, and it's perfect for a gift for this holiday season or just enjoying for yourself. So first we're going to make the sugar cookie dough. To do this, I'm using my stand mixer. This is brand new because Black Friday has treated me well. But of course, if you don't have a stand mixer, a hand mixer works perfectly fine. So I have my paddle attachment here. You always want to use paddle attachments when you're making cookie dough. And I have my softened unsalted butter. It is very important that this is soft to the point where you can easily spread it out with a spatula, because if it's rock hard and it just came out of the fridge, it'll be impossible to whip enough air into this and incorporate the sugar and the rest of the ingredients, which would lead to quite a tough dough. I'm going to scoop this into my bowl. And then I'm going to start off by whipping it just a little bit, to the point where it becomes a little creamier and fluffy. Once the color of the butter becomes a little pale, add in the white granulated sugar. Then beat this until it becomes really fluffy and almost doubled in volume. This has been mixing for approximately 5 minutes now. So now to this, I'm gonna add in my egg. Also add in the vanilla and almond extract. So for the vanilla extract, you want to make sure you get pure vanilla extract, not artificial ones. It just has a better flavor. I get mine from Costco. And for the almond extract, it's best if you get it cleared. We're also going to use this for the decoration later on. So I find mine at Bulk Barn. You can also get it from Michael's, and I use the brand Wilton. It is crucial for you to scrape down the bowl every once in a while. Basically, as soon as the ingredients come up the sides like this, I would scrape it back down so that you're incorporating the air evenly for all of the ingredients inside of the bowl. We basically want to mix this until all of the ingredients are really fluffy and pale in color, so this should increase in volume even more. And we're also trying to break down the sugar granules, so when you dip your finger into it and you rub it between your fingers, you should not feel as huge clumps of the sugar as you did when you added it in. The butter mixture is now ready, and now I'm going to incorporate the dry ingredients. So first I'm going to mix the salt and the baking powder in with the all-purpose flour. You want to do this beforehand because the last thing you want is to have clumps of baking powder inside of your cookies. That doesn't taste very good. So I'm going to add those in and just mix until incorporated. Now add this directly into the butter mixture. Now just mix this on the lowest setting for about 30 seconds until everything is combined. You do not want to overmix this mixture, and you also want to go slow so that the dry ingredients don't explode all over the place. And that's it with the dough. So I'm going to scrape everything down, and we're going to transfer it into a plastic wrap so we can place into the fridge for it to chill. And I like to actually flatten this down so that it takes less time to chill. Now into the fridge this goes for about an hour until it is nice and chilled. To test if it is ready, just touch the center of the dough and then touch the side of the dough. If they're equally as stiff, that means it is ready to go. My dough has finished chilling in the fridge. It took around 45 minutes, so a little bit faster, but again, the time will vary for you. And I'm going to unwrap this. So once again, you want to make sure it's ready by pushing the center and the outer edge. If it's the same stiffness, that means that it is chilled throughout nice and evenly. Now to make sure that my dough stays cold so I don't have to keep putting it back in the fridge, I'm actually just going to work with half of this. So I'm going to cut the dough in half. And I'm going to take half of this dough and place it back into the fridge. Now the reason why I do this is because I find that when I'm working with a large portion of dough, it tends to thaw out, so I have to work super fast. So I find that if I work with a smaller portion, I don't have to rush as much, and we can also bake it off in 2 portions, so it's just more strategic this way. So this is gonna go back in the fridge. Now for the rest of the dough, I'm gonna place some of this flour onto my work surface, just to make sure nothing sticks. So I'm going to apply pressure evenly and then just really gently roll this out. You want to start off kind of light, because if you press too harshly and too aggressively, and actually ends up cracking the dough. I've rolled out my dough to a thickness that I'm happy with. I'm now going to take my collection of cookie cutters to cut out the shapes that I want to. I have some mittens here, snowflakes, Christmas trees. If you find that the dough is becoming a little softer and difficult to get a clean shape and difficult to handle, definitely put it back into the fridge, because if you work with really soft dough, you end up getting a really kind of just like mushy shape, and it wouldn't be the clean cookie that you want it to be. So I've cut out my cookies from the dough as much as I can. Now I have some scraps. So when you're working with scraps, it's important to note that you don't want to over knead this in any way, because the dough is already kneaded. So just mush all the scraps back together without kneading it. You just kind of want to press it until it forms a ball again, and I'm actually going to place this back into the fridge while I work on the other half of my dough. I have a tray full of my cookies, and I'm going to place this back into the fridge for 5 to 10 minutes. Now the reason why I chill my dough before I bake it is so that it goes into the oven cold, which allows it to retain its shape much better so that it has a really crisp edge. Meanwhile, I'm going to cut out the rest of my cookies as well as the scraps that I left in the fridge. And note that my oven is already preheated to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you haven't done that already, make sure you do so. Make sure your oven is really nice and hot before you bake anything. So into the fridge this goes. My cookies have chilled, they're now stiff again, so I'm going to place this into the oven to bake. My oven is preheated at 350 degrees Fahrenheit, and I'm going to bake this for 9 to 12 minutes. Now the bake time will definitely vary for you based off of how big and how thick the cookies are. Bigger cookies obviously would take longer, so adjust the time accordingly. You want to make sure you keep an eye on this throughout the bake time so that nothing's burning, and you want to make sure it's cooked thoroughly. I also like to rotate the pan halfway through bake time so that everything can brown evenly. I'm making royal icing to decorate these cookies with. They not only dry really quickly, but they also dry really hard so that you don't have to worry about breaking it while you're painting on top. And they also have a really white color, which means that it gives you the perfect blank canvas to decorate on top of. Royal icing is consisted of 2 main ingredients, egg whites and icing sugar. I'm just using fresh egg whites. I think that usually if you buy really fresh eggs and you make sure it's not bad, it's pretty safe to eat, but if you feel a little bit paranoid about that, of course you can buy pasteurized egg whites or even use meringue powder. So add the icing sugar and the egg whites into the bowl, and then turn on the mixer and mix until everything is fully smooth. Then turn up the speed and let it mix for just a little longer. I find that when you whip it for a little more than it actually needs, it dries a little bit faster, but it also has a paler color. Once that is done, I'm going to take out most of this icing sugar and place it into a bowl, which we're going to use to dip the cookies into later on. This is going to be the thinner portion of the royal icing, which we're going to coat the cookies completely with. I like to leave a little extra in the bowl and then add more icing sugar to that to thicken it up. So we're going to add this in and mix it for just until it's combined. You don't want to whip it for too long or it becomes really stiff. This is the thicker royal icing that I'm going to kind of decorate on top of the cookies after I'm painting it. This is going to give it the fine details, because if it's really thick, then it stays in shape and it's easier to kind of create really thin lines. If you find that it's too thick to the point where you can't pipe it, add a little bit of water and just mix it in until you think it's the right consistency. To test it, what I like to do is dab on a little bit onto my silicone mat, take a brush or just any sort of object and flatten that out. And if it stays and you can, it doesn't spread anymore and you can see the brush strokes in it, that means it's the right consistency. So I'm going to transfer this into a Ziploc bag, which I'm going to use to pipe the royal icing later on. And meanwhile, this is going to keep it from drying out. You want to make sure that you're covering royal icing at all times when you're not using it, because it dries out really quickly. So the portion that I set aside earlier, I put a layer of plastic wrap on top of it to make sure it doesn't have a dry layer once I actually need to use it. So now to cover these cookies, I'm going to be using the dipping technique today. So this is a little bit different from the traditional way of icing sugar cookies. Instead of piping a border and then flooding it, I'm just going to dip the cookie straight in there so it has the thinnest possible layer, but it's also super even. I like this technique because not only is it faster, but it also gives you a thinner layer of the royal icing, which means that the cookies aren't going to be overly sweet. This is also a lot faster because you don't have to wait for the border to dry and have 2 different types of royal icing to work with, so it saves a lot of time. So dip the cookies in. You want to make sure that it is fully coated, and then just take an offset spatula to spread off any of that excess. Give it a good shake so that it's nice and even, and poke any of those air bubbles out with a toothpick to make sure that there aren't any dried up air bubbles later on. Once all the cookies are done, make sure that you cover any leftover vanilla icing in plastic wrap and keep it in the fridge. For the sugar cookies, make sure you let it dry completely. This usually takes a couple of hours, but it definitely depends on the consistency and the thickness of your icing. We're now ready to start painting these cookies. And it's really important that you have enough patience to let that icing dry, or else it's going to ruin your final product. You can see there are no dents on top of the icing. To decorate, you're going to need some gel food coloring. I like to use gel food coloring because it's more condensed and thicker. This way you can control how much you actually put on the cookies, and you can control the opacity and the vibrancy of the color. To dilute the food coloring, you're going to need some food extract. So I use the same almond extract that I put in the cookies. Any sort of clear flavor extract works for this because we just want something with high alcohol content. You can actually use food grade alcohol as well. And the reason why we use that is because alcohol evaporates very quickly. So after we paint these onto the cookies, the alcohol evaporates and you just have the color left over. For brushes, you want to have some brushes just dedicated to food. You don't want to use anything that you have touched paint with as well because that just won't be sanitary. Then you want 2 bowls, one for the almond extract and one with clean water so that you can wash off the brush whenever. And make sure you have a plate to use as a palette and then some kitchen towels to dab off that brush whenever. For my work surface, I use a silicone mat because it's just flatter and nothing gets in the way of me actually decorating. So I'm starting off with snowflake cookies because I think that these are the easiest to ease into working with royal icing. The shapes of snowflakes are pretty symmetrical, so I like to kind of play around with this first. I did a couple different designs and I also added some color. So for these, I basically just thinned out that food coloring with lots of the almond extract, painted on a thin layer, and then once it is dried, I piped on another layer of royal icing. For these types of cookies, whenever you're layering on royal icing, it's important for you to allow that food coloring to dry fully first so that it doesn't pool around that royal icing and create kind of a messy look. For the Christmas trees, this is where I start really going full out with the painting. You essentially just have to treat the wall food coloring like actual watercolor paint. If you want a deeper, more opaque color, you're going to have to add less food coloring, which in real life would be water. This is my favorite design out of everything. I think it just has such a sophisticated look to it. For this one, once again, I'm just playing with the layering of royal icing and I use a brush to kind of spread that out and create a snowy look. To create really fine details, you want to use a smaller brush, of course, with less of that food coloring to create a really sharp and clean look. You also want to dilute that food coloring with the almond extract so that it can flow a little bit easier and create smoother lines. To create looks that have a little bit more depth and variety, I like to just play around with the thickness of that paint. So here you can see me layering on different shades of green, even though I just used the same color. By adding more or less of that almond extract, you can achieve different values. And if you add lots of that almond extract to different colors, you can create more of a blended and watery look. Here I tried to create the look of ornaments on top of a tree. So I just painted that Christmas tree, waited for that to dry, and then piped on little daubs of royal icing. Let that dry completely, and this is very important because you don't want to have cracked pieces of ornament, and then paint on a little bit more of that coloring. The wreaths were one of my favorites to paint. They're just so simple and quick to do. Make sure that you're using a round brush for this, and also keep in mind the consistency of your food coloring so that it flows better. For today, I'm really just going crazy on the festivities with all the Christmas trees, the fun Christmas gloves, and the wreaths. In terms of design, of course, you can do whatever you like, but I definitely recommend you going on the internet and looking for some inspiration. Places like Pinterest and Instagram has a lot of really great ideas for you. And of course, these designs as well. I actually got these inspired from a few watercolor paintings that I did back then, because it really does achieve a very similar result using this type of technique and using watercolor paintings. And once you're done decorating these cookies, that's about it. Just let them sit for a little longer so that they can fully dry out and they're ready to be enjoyed. These are really great gifts for the holiday season since each one is so special and they are homemade, so people would definitely like the way that they taste and of course the way that they look. That's it with these sugar cookies. I really hope that you enjoyed this video as well as my different techniques on how to make and decorate them. They're very different from the traditional version, which is why I like them, because you get less royal icing on top, which means that it's much more balanced in terms of the sweetness of the cookie. And for the decoration, as somebody who paints and does art for a very long time, I think that it's so much more fun to have the ability to paint onto food instead of just squeezing icing out of a bag. I really hope that you could try this out. It's a really great way to gift to your friends and family. They make really fun presents, very delicious and pretty to look at as well. To store, make sure you keep them in an airtight container so they don't become stale. Keep them in the fridge or at room temperature, but make sure you don't leave it for too long because the color will start fading after a little bit of time. So I really hope that you could try these out. Happy holidays. Bye!